The job posting said outdoor construction, Dubai competitive salary. It did not say 52 degrees Celsius. It did not say 12-hour shift starting at 6 in the morning on an unshaded rooftop 30 meters above a street that was itself hot enough to blister skin through shoe leather. It did not say that the water truck, the single vehicle responsible for supplying drinking water to the entire site, would arrive once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and that on certain days, for reasons that were never fully explained, it would not arrive at all. 43 men from Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan had taken the job anyway. Most of them had taken it because the alternative was worse. The salary, between $600 and $900 per month, was more than they could earn at home. The recruitment agency had told them the conditions were standard. Several of them had worked construction in the Gulf before and knew that standard covered a wide range of things. They flew in through Dubai International Airport in March 2023, which was the right time to arrive. March in Dubai is tolerable, mid-20s, occasionally a breeze, the kind of weather that makes a person think they can handle this place. They were assigned to a labor camp in the industrial district of Al Quoz, 8 to a room, shared bathrooms, meals provided. The camp was not comfortable. It was shelter. They started work on a residential tower development in the Jumeirah Village Circle district. Foundation work initially, then structural, then the external cladding that was their specific assignment, a job that required working on scaffold platforms on the exterior of the building, fully exposed to the sun, for the duration of the shift. In March, this was manageable. In April, it became harder. By June, it was something else entirely. Dubai sits at 25 degrees north latitude, which puts it roughly equivalent to Miami or Riyadh in terms of solar angle. But Dubai has something Miami does not. The Arabian Gulf to the east, a shallow, warm body of water that adds humidity to the already extreme heat, creating a wet bulb temperature effect that makes the air feel significantly hotter than the thermometer reads. On a 45-degree day in Dubai with 60% humidity, the physiological heat stress on a human body is equivalent to approximately 55 degrees in dry heat. The body sweat cannot evaporate efficiently in humid air. The cooling system runs, but the results don't show up in the core temperature the way they should. The men on the scaffold knew none of this in technical terms. They knew it in their bodies. They knew it the way you know when something is wrong, before you can name what the wrong thing is. By mid-June, the temperature at the worksite was routinely reaching 48 to 52 degrees Celsius between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. The scaffold platforms on which they worked were metal, aluminum framing, and steel deck plates that absorbed heat and radiated it upward to the soles of their boots. The surface temperature of the scaffold deck at noon was measured, on one occasion by a safety officer, who was later transferred to a different site, at 71 degrees Celsius. The UAE government has a heat work ban, a regulation prohibiting outdoor labor between 12:30 p.m. and 3 p.m. from June 15th to September 15th. This ban was in place in June 2023. On paper, the men should have been off the scaffold by 12:30. On most days, they were not. The foreman's name was Tariq. He was 44 years old, Pakistani, and had been working construction in Dubai for 11 years. He spoke Urdu, Punjabi, and enough Arabic to communicate with the site management. He was not a bad man. He was a man in a position that had been structured to make bad outcomes likely, and he made the choices available to him within that structure, and some of those choices were wrong. And he knew they were wrong while he was making them. The pressure came from above. The project was behind schedule. The developer had penalty clauses in the contract that activated if certain milestones were not met by specific dates. The main contractor passed the pressure down to the subcontractors. The subcontractors passed it to the foreman. The foreman passed it to the workers, who had no one below them to pass it to. Tariq told his crew on the morning of June 21st that they would be working through the midday break. He said it in Urdu, and he did not frame it as a request. He told them the water truck had been scheduled for 11 a.m. and again at 2 p.m., and that anyone who needed water could take it from the site office cooler in the meantime. The site office cooler held 12 liters. There were 43 men on site. A laborer named Amir, 26 years old from a village out. The first man to go down was not Amir. His name was Suresh. He was 38 years old, from Tamil Nadu in southern India, and had been working on the scaffold's upper platform. The hottest level, closest of building's unshaded metal cladding panels that reflected additional heat outward. He had been quiet all morning, in a way that several of his colleagues would later describe as different from his normal quiet. Suresh was normally quiet in a focused way. That morning he was quiet in an absent way. The distinction is subtle. The men who worked beside him every day noticed it. At 1:15 p.m., Suresh sat down on the scaffold deck without warning, not the controlled sit of a man taking a break, the sudden drop of a man whose legs have made a unilateral decision. One of the other workers, a man named Pradeep, caught his shoulder before he could fall sideways against the guardrail. Suresh was conscious. His eyes were open. He could answer questions in single words. He could not stand up. Pradeep called down to the level below. Word reached Tariq within 3 minutes. Tariq climbed to the upper platform, looked at Suresh, and made the assessment that every person in his position makes in that moment. Is this serious enough to stop the work? He had made this assessment before on other sites, in other summers. He had a framework for it, assembled from 11 years of experience, that was not written down anywhere and was not aligned with any medical guideline, but was functional and was his. He decided it was serious enough to bring Suresh down, but not serious enough to stop the work. 2 men helped Suresh to the lift platform and brought him to ground level. Tariq told someone to get him water from the cooler. The cooler, at this point, had approximately 3 liters left in it. It had been accessed throughout the morning by 43 men. Suresh sat in the shade of the site hoarding, a corrugated metal fence around the site perimeter, and drank 2 cups of water and did not improve significantly. The shade temperature against the metal hoarding was 47 degrees. There was no cooler location available. The site office had air conditioning, but the site office was locked, and Tariq did not have a key. The site manager, who had the key, had left the site at 12:30 for reasons the official report describes as a scheduled meeting. At 1:40 p.m., a second man came down. At 2:10 p.m., 2 more. Amir was still on the scaffold at 2:10 p.m. He had finished his 750-milliliter bottle at approximately 11:30 a.m. In the 90 minutes since, he had sweated through his shirt completely, soaked to the back of his trousers, and drunk nothing. His mouth tasted of salt. His vision had developed an edge, not blurring exactly, more quality of overexposure. The way a photograph looks when too much light hits the sensor, everything slightly too bright and slightly too flat simultaneously. He knew what this was. He had not experienced it before, but he knew it was the way you know certain things before they happen to you, from stories other people have told. His uncle had worked in Qatar in 2019 and had come home with a damaged kidney and a story about the afternoon he spent on a concrete slab in 50-degree heat. Amir had listened to that story. He was listening to it again now, from the inside. He had a decision to make that was not really a decision because one of the options was not available to him. Option 1, stop work, go down, get water. Option 2, keep working. Option 1 was not available because stopping work without permission meant a formal warning, and a formal warning meant potential termination, and termination meant deportation, and deportation meant going home to a wife and a 3-week-old son with no money, and a debt to the recruitment agency that he had not yet paid off. The recruitment agency debt, a fee charged to workers for job placement, a practice illegal under UAE law and universal in practice, was $1,400. He had paid $600. He still owed $800. He kept working. At 2:30 p.m., he dropped a cladding panel. Not a serious drop. The panel was tethered by a safety line and swung against the building face without falling. But the drop was loud, and the safety line jerked against its anchor point, and the sound and the jerk brought him back into sharp focus for approximately 30 seconds, the way a sudden shock can briefly cut to the fog of heat impairment. In those 30 seconds, he looked at his hands, which were shaking in a fine, continuous tremor he had not been aware of until he was aware of it, and he thought about Rowan, and he unclipped his tool belt and hung it on the scaffold guardrail and went to the lift platform and came down. Tariq saw him coming down. He said nothing. By 3 p.m., 11 men had left the scaffold. 6 were sitting against the site, hoarding in whatever shade existed. 3 had been moved to the interior of the building. Unfinished floors, no glass in the windows yet, but out of direct sun and marginally cooler. Two had been taken by taxi to the nearest clinic. Suresh, who had been the first down and who had not improved over 90 minutes, and a man named Muhammad from Sylhet in Bangladesh who had vomited twice and was no longer able to hold a conversation. Tariq had called the site manager at 2:15. The site manager had told him to manage it and that the water truck was coming. He had called again at 2:45. The site manager had told him the same thing. 29 men were still on the scaffold. The temperature at 3 p.m., according to the weather station at Dubai International Airport 6 kilometers away, was 49 degrees Celsius. On the scaffold, with the reflected heat from the building's cladding panels and the radiant heat from the metal deck, it was higher. There is no official measurement for what it was on the scaffold at 3 p.m. on June 21st, 2023, because no one measured it. The safety officer who had measured the deck temperature earlier in the season was, as noted, no longer assigned to the site. Amir was sitting on the ground inside the unfinished building on the 6th floor. Kareem pulled onto site and began connecting his hose to the distribution point near the site entrance. He had been to the site before. He knew the routine. He was not prepared for what he found when the first men came down from the scaffold toward his truck. He later told investigators that he had been delivering water to construction sites in Dubai for 6 years, and that he had never seen men move toward his truck the way those men moved that afternoon. He said they moved like the water was the only thing. He opened the valve. The official count from the incident report is that 14 men received medical treatment following the events of June 21st, 2023. 8 were treated at the site by a paramedic who arrived at 4:10 p.m., 30 minutes after the water truck, and therefore 30 minutes after most of the acute crisis had already been addressed by the water itself. 4 were taken to clinics. 2 were hospitalized. Suresh spent 3 days in hospital. His discharge summary noted acute heat exhaustion with mild renal stress. His kidneys recovered fully. He returned to Nepal 6 weeks later, before his contract ended, on a medical repatriation arranged by a labor rights organization that became involved after the incident was reported by a journalist. Muhammad from Sylhet spent 5 days in hospital. His discharge summary noted more significant renal involvement and required for fluid replacement over 3 days. He also returned home early. The remaining 12 men who had received treatment returned to work within days. Some of them returned to the same site. The project was still behind schedule. Tariq was formally reprimanded by the subcontractor. He was not terminated. He was assigned to a different site 2 months later where, according to people who worked with him there, he enforced water breaks with a rigor that his previous crew would not have recognized. The site manager who told him twice to manage it and that the water truck was coming was not formally reprimanded. His name does not appear in the official incident report. The passive voice covers a great deal. Amir flew home to Nepal in November 2023 at the end of his contract. He had paid off the recruitment agency debt by October. He arrived at Kathmandu Airport on a Tuesday morning, and his wife was waiting with Rohan, who was by then 8 months old and did not know yet that his father had spent an afternoon on a scaffold in 52-degree heat, deciding whether the $800 he still owed was worth more than his life. The photograph from his breast pocket had survived. The image was slightly faded at one corner where the sweat had been heaviest. It was still recognizable. To understand what happened on that scaffold, you need to understand the system that put those men there. It does not begin in Dubai. It begins in a village outside Kathmandu or a district in Tamil Nadu or a town in Sylhet, where a man in his 20s with limited local employment options receives a visit or a phone call from a recruitment agent who tells him about work in the Gulf. The salary sounds good. The agent is known in the community. He has sent other men before, men who came back with money. The man signs a contract he may or may not be able to fully read, pays a placement fee he almost certainly does not have in cash, and takes a loan to cover from a moneylender or a family member or both. This is a recruitment debt. It is the foundational mechanism of the system. Once a man owes money to get the job is no longer optional. He cannot walk away from unsafe conditions without losing the income he needs to repay the debt. He cannot complain formally without risking termination and deportation, which means going home in debt with nothing. He cannot organize collectively because collective action by migrant workers in the UAE is illegal and the penalty is deportation. The debt is not incidental to the system. It is structural. It is the architecture of compliance. The UAE banned recruitment fees in 2021 under the Worker Protection Program. The said reforms introduced partly in response to international scrutiny ahead of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, which had drawn global attention to Gulf labor conditions. The ban is real. The enforcement is inconsistent. Recruitment agents operating in Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan are outside UAE jurisdiction. The fees continue. The workers arrive with debts they cannot speak about because speaking about them is itself evidence of illegal transaction. Amir's $1,400 debt was not unique. Of the 43 men on that site, researchers who conducted interviews afterward found that at least 31 had paid recruitment fees ranging from $800 to $2,200. None of them had reported this. All of them understood why reporting was not an option. The second structural element is the kafala system. Kafala is an Arabic word meaning sponsorship. Under the kafala system, a migrant worker's legal right to be in the UAE is tied to their employer. If the employment relationship ends, for any reason, including the worker leaving due to unsafe conditions, the worker's visa becomes invalid. They must leave the country or face deportation as an undocumented person. The UAE reformed the kafala system in 2021, introducing changes that theoretically allow workers to change employers without the employer's consent. In practice, the reforms have been inconsistently implemented, and for workers without the financial resources or legal knowledge to navigate the process, the effective reality remains that leaving a job means leaving the country. This is the second mechanism. The debt makes walking away from the job economically impossible. The kafala system makes it legally dangerous. Together, they create a situation in which a man with a photograph of his 8-month-old son in his breast pocket will continue working on a 52-degree scaffold for 90 minutes after he has run out of water, because the calculation he has made correctly is that the risk of heat illness is more survivable than the consequences of stopping. He is not wrong to make this calculation. That is the most important thing to understand about it. Given the constraints he is operating under, he is making a rational decision. The irrationality is not in the man. It is in the structure around him. Now the physiology. Because what those men's bodies were experiencing across those 6 hours is specific and documentable and worse than most people imagine. At the start of the shift, a healthy adult male doing moderate physical labor in 44-degree heat loses approximately 1.2 liters of sweat per hour. As the temperature rises through morning toward 52 degrees, that rate increases to between 1.5 and 2 liters per hour. In 6 hours of continuous work with no water resupply, the body's fluid deficit reaches between 8 and 12 liters. To put that in context, a fluid deficit of 2% of body weight impairs cognitive function and physical performance. At 4%, the impairment is significant. Reaction time, decision-making, and coordination all degrade measurably. At 6%, the risk of heat exhaustion becomes acute. At 8% and above, the risk of organ damage, kidneys first, then liver, then the multi-organ failure cascade that ends in death, becomes real and present. 8 to 12 liters of deficit in a man weighing 65 to 70 kilograms represents a body weight loss of 12 to 18%. No one on that scaffold was at the upper end of that range. The men who went down earliest prevented themselves from reaching it, and the water truck arrived before the full 6 hours had elapsed for most of them. But Suresh, who was the first down at 1:15 and who was still at the site 3 hours later without adequate rehydration, came closer to the dangerous end of that range than the clinical language of his discharge summary fully communicates. The kidneys are the first organ to show measurable damage in severe dehydration. They are the body's fluid regulation system, and when the fluid they need to function is not available, they begin to concentrate urine to the point of dysfunction. The compound in urine that causes kidney damage when too concentrated is called myoglobin, a protein released from muscle tissue that is breaking down under heat stress. When myoglobin concentration exceeds a certain threshold, it begins to physically block the kidney tubules. This is called rhabdomyolysis, and it is the mechanism behind the renal stress noted in both Suresh's and Muhammad's discharge summaries. Both of them recovered, fully in Suresh's case, with some lasting reduction in kidney function. In Muhammad's, a consequence that his discharge summary noted in clinical language that Muhammad himself, when he was later interviewed by the labor rights researcher, had understood to mean his kidneys work a little less well now and this will probably not get better. He was 31 years old when he was told this. The heat work ban that was violated that day, the regulation prohibiting outdoor labor between 12:30 and 3 p.m., exists because the UAE government has data on what happens to human bodies in those conditions during those hours. The ban is not symbolic. It is based on thermal stress modeling that calculates the point at which the combination of air temperature, humidity, solar radiation, and physical exertion exceeds what the human body can sustain. On June 21st, 2023, the conditions exceeded the ban's threshold at approximately 12:15 p.m. The men were still on the scaffold. The Dubai municipality received the incident report. An investigation was conducted. The subcontractor was fined. The fine was 50,000 UAE dirhams, approximately $13,600. The project continued. The residential tower was completed on schedule, approximately 6 weeks after the original milestone date that the schedule pressure had been designed to meet. It was completed late anyway. The penalty clause in the developer's contract was not triggered because the delay fell within the contractual tolerance band. The 50,000 dirham fine was a business expense. It was smaller than the cost of 1 week's delay on a project of that scale. There is a detail in Amir's account that does not appear in the official incident report, and that I have thought about more than almost any other detail in this story. When he came down from the scaffold at 2:30 p.m., after dropping the panel, after feeling the tremor in his hands, he passed Tariq on the way to the lift platform. Tariq looked at him. Amir looked at Tariq. Neither of them said anything. Amir told the researcher who interviewed him that he did not feel anger at Tariq in that moment. He said he felt something that he struggled to find the right word for in either Nepali or the limited English he had, and the researcher, who spoke Nepali, offered a word, and Amir said yes, that word, and the word was recognition. They recognized something in each other, in that look, about what they were both inside, and what neither of them could change by looking at it. Tariq was also a migrant worker. He was also inside a structure that constrained his choices. He had more power than Amir, and he had used some of it badly, and he knew it, and Amir knew it, and both of them knew that the structure around them had been designed so that the accountability would flow downward and stop at the level where the men without options were standing. The developer's name does not appear in the incident report. The labor rights organization that became involved after the incident was called Migrant-Rights.org, a Bahrain-based NGO that monitors labor conditions across the Gulf. They learned about the June 21st incident through a journalist contact in Dubai, who had been tipped off by a worker at the site. The journalist could not publish the story directly. Press freedom in the UAE operates under constraints that make reporting on labor violations at named development projects legally complicated, but she passed the information to the NGO, which operated under different jurisdictional exposure. A researcher named Hannah contacted Suresh through a Nepali community network in Dubai while he was still in hospital. She spoke to him 3 times before he agreed to describe what had happened in detail. The hesitation was not suspicion of her. It was a calculation he had already made many times. That speaking created risk and silence was a safer option, and that this calculation did not stop being true just because he was in a hospital bed with a damaged kidney. She told him she would not use his full name or his employer's name in anything she published without his consent. She told him that the documentation itself, the act of recording what happened, had value independent of whether it ever became public. He understood this. He agreed. She contacted 14 of the 43 men over the following 3 months. Of those 14, 9 agreed to speak. Of those 9, 4 agreed to have their accounts recorded in any form. The other 5 spoke to her informally, off record, and what they told her informed her understanding of the incident without appearing in any document. The picture that emerged from those conversations was consistent in its details and consistent with the official incident report in its facts, and diverged from the official report in everything that the passive voice had omitted. Of the 43 men on the site that day, the researcher was able to track the subsequent situations of 31 through community networks and direct contact over the following year. Amir returned to Nepal in November as planned. He did not return to the Gulf. He found work in Kathmandu in construction. Lower pay, local currency, no recruitment debt, no kafala. He told a researcher in a follow-up interview 6 months after his return that he did not regret going to Dubai. He regretted specific things about how it had gone, but not the going itself, because the money he had sent home over those 8 months had paid off the family debt and covered his son's first year of expenses and put a small amount aside. The arithmetic of it still worked out, he said, even accounting for the afternoon on the scaffold. He said this without apparent bitterness. The researcher noted in her write-up that she found this the hardest part of the story to convey. Not the suffering, which was documentable, but the rational acceptance of it, which was harder to translate into a language that an audience in a wealthy country would understand without either romanticizing or condescending to it. Suresh returned to Tamil Nadu in September 2023, 6 weeks before his contract ended, on the medical repatriation the NGO arranged. His kidney function was fully normal at his 3-month follow-up. He had not worked in construction since. He was driving an auto rickshaw in his hometown. The income was approximately 40% of what he'd earned in Dubai. He had a wife and 2 children. The arithmetic, in his case, did not work out as cleanly. Muhammad remained in Dubai for 4 more months after his hospitalization, completing his contract, because leaving early would have forfeited the end-of-service gratuity he was owed, approximately $1,100, and he needed that money. His kidney function at discharge was rated as mildly reduced. At his 6-month follow-up in Bangladesh, it was rated as mildly reduced. The doctor who saw him told him to drink plenty of water and avoid extreme heat exposure. He worked as a construction laborer in Bangladesh in summer. He drank plenty of water. Tariq was reassigned to a different site in August 2023. The researcher spoke to 2 men who worked with him at the new site. Both of them described him as strict about water breaks, more strict than any foreman they had worked under before. One of them said Tariq would stop work himself and physically walk to the water point and bring bottles back to the scaffold rather than wait for the truck. The other said he had seen Tariq argue with a site manager about the water schedule in a way that had surprised him, because foremen did not argue with site managers. The researcher asked if she could speak to Tariq directly. The 2 workers said they would ask. Tariq's response, conveyed through them, was that he did not want to speak to anyone about anything related to his work, past or present, and that he wished everyone well. The researcher understood this. She noted it in her report and moved on. The subcontractor was fined 50,000 dirhams and received a formal warning from the Dubai municipality. Their operating license was not suspended. They completed the Jumeirah Village Circle project and were awarded 2 subsequent contracts in Dubai in 2024, a commercial development in Business Bay and a hotel project in Dubai Marina. Both contracts were with different developers than the original project. The fine and the warning did not appear to have affected their commercial standing in any documentable way. The developer of the original project, a real estate company registered in the UAE with subsidiaries in several other jurisdictions, was not named as a party in the incident investigation. The researcher filed a formal request under UAE transparency provisions for documentation relating to the investigation scope. The request was not answered within the statutory period. A follow-up request was also not answered. The residential tower was sold. Most of the units were purchased by investors rather than owner-occupiers. Several were listed on short-term rental platforms. The building received a 4-star rating on one major property website based on its amenities, location, and views. The scaffold on which Suresh sat down, on which Amir's hands trembled, on which Muhammad vomited twice in the afternoon heat, was dismantled and moved to the next site. In the summer of 2024, the UAE announced strengthened enforcement of the heat work ban, including increased inspection frequency and higher fines for violations. The announcement followed international media coverage of heat-related deaths at construction sites across the Gulf in the spring and summer that year, coverage driven partly by data published by the researchers' organization and partly by a broader reckoning with Gulf labor conditions that had been building since the World Cup in Qatar. The strengthened enforcement was real. Inspection rates increased. Several companies received larger fines than had been issued in previous years. In July 2024, a heat work ban violation was recorded at a construction site in Dubai at 1:45 p.m. on a day when the temperature was 47 degrees. The fine was 80,000 dirhams. The workers on the site at the time of the violation were from Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. None of them were the same men who had been on the Jumeirah Village Circle scaffold the previous June, but several of them had the same recruitment debts, the same scaffold constraints, and the same photograph in the same breast pocket. The structure produces consistent outputs because the structure has not changed in the ways that would produce different outputs. The researcher published her report in January 2024. It received coverage in The Guardian, the BBC, and several European newspapers. It received no coverage in UAE domestic media. Several Gulf-based business publications ran pieces disputing specific statistics in the report. The NGO published responses to the disputes. The disputes continued in the way disputes continue, when the underlying facts are not in question, but the implications of the facts are inconvenient for certain parties. The report recommended 5 things: mandatory worker-paid recruitment fee reimbursement by employers, real-time water delivery monitoring at construction sites, anonymous worker complaint mechanisms with whistleblower protection, increased transparency in incident reporting, and criminal liability for developers, not just subcontractors, in cases of serious labor violations. As of the end of 2024, none of the 5 recommendations had been implemented. 2 of them were under active discussion in UAE policy forums. 3 of them had not been discussed at all. Amir's son Rohan turned 1-year-old in February 2024. Amir was in Kathmandu when it happened. He was there for the birthday. He has been there for every day since he came home. He has a new photograph now, not the one from his breast pocket, which he keeps in a drawer at home, slightly faded at one corner. The new one is on his phone. It shows Rohan standing unassisted for the first time, slightly unsteady, arms out for balance, grinning at the camera with the particular grin of a child who has just discovered something extraordinary about what his body can do. Amir showed this photograph to the researcher during their final interview. She noted that he did not say anything when he showed it to her. He just held the phone toward her so she could see it, and then he put the phone back in his pocket, and they continued the interview. She said it was the most important piece of documentation she collected in the entire investigation. It is not in the report. Every story on this channel has 3 things in common: extreme heat, a human body pushed past what it was designed to handle, and a set of decisions, some made before the crisis, some during it, that determined whether the person survived and in what condition. The first 2 episodes were about nature. Death Valley does not intend to kill you. The Australian summer does not have a motive. The heat is indifferent. You walked into it or arrived around you, and your survival depended on your preparation and your decisions and some luck. This episode is different. The heat on that scaffold was not indifferent. It was a predictable outcome of a series of decisions made by people who knew what the heat would do and made the decisions anyway. The water truck did not fail to arrive because of mechanical inevitability. It failed to arrive because of a sequence of human choices, each one individually deniable, each one collectively lethal, produced that outcome. Suresh's kidney damage, Muhammad's permanently reduced kidney function, the tremor in Amir's hands that he noticed when he dropped the panel. These were not accidents. They were outputs of system. This matters for survival rules, because the rules for surviving a system that has been designed around your compliance are different from the rules for surviving a desert. Rule 1. Know what you are owed before you need it. In every country that hosts large numbers of outdoor workers, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Australia, across Southern Europe, there are legal protections governing heat exposure, water access, rest breaks, and work hour limits during extreme temperatures. These protections exist on paper. They are inconsistently enforced, but they exist, and knowing them is the difference between understanding that you are being denied something specific and feeling only a general sense that something is wrong. In the UAE in 2023, outdoor workers were legally entitled to a midday break from 12:30 to 3 p.m. during summer months. They were legally entitled to adequate drinking water, not water available somewhere on site, but water accessible to workers during their shifts. The men on that scaffold were being denied both of these legal entitlements simultaneously. Most of them did not know the specific regulations well enough to name what was being denied. Amir knew water was running out. He did not know that the law required the employer to ensure it did not run out. The distinction matters because naming the specific violation is the first step toward reporting it, and reporting it, even anonymously, even through a third party, even after the fact, is the action that creates the record, that creates the pressure that occasionally, incrementally, changes the system. Know what you are owed in writing before the first day of work. Rule 2. Find a structure that exists outside your employer's structure. The men on that scaffold were inside a structure, recruitment debt, CAFLA, hierarchy, schedule pressure, that had been designed to make their compliance rational and their complaints dangerous. This is a real constraint. It is not overcome by telling people to simply speak up, because speaking up within the structure is genuinely dangerous, and dismissing that danger is not helpful. But there is always a structure outside the employer's structure. An NGO, a community network, an embassy, a journalist, a labor rights hotline, an anonymous reporting mechanism. These structures are imperfect and underfunded and inconsistently effective. They are also the only mechanism that has produced any of the improvements in Gulf labor conditions that have occurred over the past decade. Every fine that was increased, every regulation that was strengthened, every reform that was implemented began with someone who was inside the structure finding a way to communicate with someone outside it. The researcher who documented what happened on June 21st learned about it because a worker told a journalist, and a journalist told her. The chain was indirect and careful, and it worked. Suresh got his medical repatriation because that chain existed. Muhammad's case is in the published record because that chain existed. Amir's account is in this story because that chain existed. Find the structure outside your employer's structure. Know it exists before you need it. In many countries, embassy labor attaches can be contacted anonymously. In the UAE, the Ministry of Human Resources has a hotline, 860. It is imperfect. It is something. Rule 3. The physical rules still apply. This rule exists because everything in this episode about systems and structures and accountability is true and important and does not change the physiology. A man on a scaffold in 52-degree heat with no water is dying by the same mechanism as a man alone in Death Valley with no water. The system that put him there is a separate problem. The body does not wait for the system problem to be resolved before it begins to fail. 1 liter per hour minimum in extreme heat, in humid heat, Gulf conditions, Florida summer, coastal Southeast Asia. More, because the sweat does not evaporate efficiently and the cooling system runs harder for the same result. The early signs of serious heat illness are not dramatic. They are a quality of absence. An absent quality in someone's silence that the men who work beside Suresh every day noticed before he went down. Confusion, that looks like distraction. Slowness, that looks like fatigue. A question not answered. A task not completed. A sentence not finished. If you see this in someone working beside you in extreme heat, the action is immediate, and it is not asking them if they are okay, because a person whose brain is overheating will tell you they are okay. The action is getting them out of the heat and getting water into them and not waiting for permission to do it. Amir dropped a panel. His body gave him a signal through his hands before his conscious mind had processed that he needed to stop. Most people who survive heat illness report something similar in retrospect, a moment where the body communicated clearly before the mind had caught up. The gap between that signal and the action is where outcomes diverge. Act on the signal. Do not negotiate with it. There's a 4th thing that is not exactly a rule. It is an observation about this particular story that seems important enough to say directly. The men on that scaffold were providing labor that built a building that was sold to investors who listed it on rental platforms where people book holidays. The supply chain between the scaffold and the rental listing passes through enough hands and enough corporate structures and enough jurisdictional layers that the connection is invisible unless someone documents it and publishes it, and a large enough number of people read it and decide that the invisibility is unacceptable. The researcher published her report. You are watching a channel that told you about it. Whether that chain produces anything depends on what happens after this video ends. Whether the person watching it is simply informed, or whether being informed changes anything they do or say or buy or vote for, or demand of the institutions that could change the structure. This is not a guilt trip. It is an accurate description of how systems change. They change when the number of people who know about them and find them unacceptable reaches a threshold. The researcher's job was to add to that number. This channel's job is to add to it further. What happens after that is not in this video. Amir is in Kathmandu. Rohan is walking now, unsteadily, arms out for balance. Suresh is driving an auto rickshaw in Tamil Nadu. His kidneys are normal. The income is 40% of what it was. Muhammad is in Sylhet. He drinks plenty of water. His kidneys work a little less well now. This will probably not get better. Tariq is on a different site. He brings water to the scaffold himself rather than waiting for the truck. He does not speak about June 21st, 2023 to anyone. The scaffold has been disassembled and moved. The building is occupied. The system is producing its next outputs on the next site, with the next 43 men in the next summer, which will be hotter than this one because they are all hotter than the last one now, and the heat work ban is still inconsistently enforced, and the recruitment fees are still being charged, and the CAFLA system is still structurally intact beneath its reformed surface, and the water truck is running its route. Whether it arrives on time depends on a valve, a schedule, a site supervisor's gesture, and a chain of decisions made by people at different levels of a structure, most of whose names do not appear in the incident report. This is heat limit. The heat on that scaffold was 52 degrees Celsius. The men on it were there because the system produced them there. The system is ongoing. The heat is ongoing. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and neither of them cancels the other out. Next episode, Mecca, June 2024. The Hajj Pilgrimage, 48 degrees Celsius. 2 million people in a valley with no wind. Over 1,300 dead in 5 days. And the question nobody has fully answered. Is there any version of this event that does not kill people or has a combination of faith, geography, and climate produce something that preparation alone cannot solve? Subscribe. This information is free. The heat is not going anywhere.